My protege hired his divorce lawyer, thinking I was blind to their betrayal. She smirked at work, expecting to steal my shares. On divorce day, my real master plan was revealed. They say the absolute hardest part of betrayal is that it never comes from your sworn enemies. It comes from the people you would have gladly taken a bullet for, the ones you trusted to watch your back when the rest of the world went dark. For me, that horrifying realization did not arrive with a dramatic scream, a shattered wine glass, or a public confrontation in a crowded restaurant. It came in the dead silence of a freezing Tuesday morning in early March, right inside the supposedly safe walls of my own custom-built home in the wealthy suburbs of Chicago. I am Caroline. I am 45 years old, and up until that exact, miserable morning, I honestly believed I was a woman who had won the lottery of life. I had a beautiful, sprawling estate, a 23-year marriage built on what I thought was an unbreakable foundation of mutual respect, and a highly lucrative marketing tech firm that I had co-founded from absolute scratch. To understand the depth of the knife in my back, you have to understand our history. My husband, Harrison, and I did not inherit our wealth. We built it. I can still vividly remember our mid-20s, sitting on the floor of a cramped, unheated studio apartment, eating cheap instant noodles while we maxed out 3 different credit cards just to buy the server space we needed for our very first client. I was the one who wrote the initial business plan. I was the one who pitched our services to local businesses while wearing a secondhand blazer. As our company grew from a desperate 2-person operation into a multi-million-dollar enterprise with over 200 employees, we were an unstoppable team. But 5 years ago, as the revenue reached numbers we had only ever dreamed of, Harrison made a suggestion. He told me that I had worked hard enough, that the grueling 80-hour work weeks were taking a toll on my health, and that I deserved to step back and enjoy the fruits of our shared labor. He offered to handle the heavy lifting at the downtown executive office while I managed our family estate, philanthropic efforts, and personal investment portfolios. I trusted him completely. Why wouldn't I? We were partners in every sense of the word. But at exactly 5:47 in the morning, the beautiful illusion I had been living in shattered into a million irreparable pieces. I was already awake, lying quietly under the heavy duvet, simply waiting for my usual 6 o'clock alarm to go off. Harrison was sleeping soundly beside me, his deep, rhythmic breathing filling the dark master bedroom. Suddenly, his phone, which he had left face up on the cold marble countertop of our master bathroom vanity, began to buzz softly. The vibration was incredibly subtle, just a low hum against the stone, but in the morning quiet, it sounded like a blaring siren to my ears. I slipped out of bed, keeping my footsteps completely silent on the hardwood floor, and walked into the bathroom. I truly did not intend to spy on him. In over 2 decades of sharing a life, I had never once checked his messages, browsed his emails, or invaded his digital privacy. We just did not do things like that. But as I reached for my silk robe hanging on the hook, the phone screen illuminated in the darkness, casting a harsh blue light across the room. The preview message on the screen was crystal clear. It read, "Can't wait for our hotel meetup today, handsome, love, Jade." I froze completely. The temperature in the room felt like it dropped to absolute zero in a single, terrifying second. My fingers hovered over the glass screen, trembling so violently I thought my knees were going to give out. Jade. The name felt like a physical punch straight to my gut, knocking the wind entirely out of my lungs. Jade was 26 years old. She was not just some random receptionist or a stranger Harrison had picked up at a downtown cocktail bar. She was my personal protege. 2 years ago, she had arrived at our firm as a fresh college graduate, eager but completely lost in the corporate world. I was the one who personally reviewed her resume. I was the one who saw a spark of potential in her nervous interview. I took her under my wing, mentored her, and spent countless hours teaching her how to analyze complex corporate data. I had welcomed this young girl into my home for holiday dinners, shared my own career struggles with her, and listened to her talk about her ambitious dreams. And now, this same girl was texting my husband at 5:47 in the morning, calling him handsome and confirming a secret hotel rendezvous. A cold, sickening feeling slithered straight through my chest, wrapping around my heart as I watched the message dim and disappear from the screen, replaced by a standard lock screen background. Exactly 13 minutes later, at 6 sharp, Harrison's usual alarm started to play its gentle morning melody. I stepped back into the bedroom, forcing my facial muscles to relax into a mask of pure, unsuspecting calm. "Morning, beautiful," Harrison mumbled, blinking sleepily as he reached out his arm and grabbed his phone with a casualness that looked completely practiced. His thumb swiped across the screen, clearing the notification log before I could even take a breath. "Sleep well?" "Like a rock," I lied, my voice remarkably steady. I studied his face for any tiny tell, any sign of guilt or nervousness that I had never needed to look for in 23 years. He just smiled. It was that same charming, boyish grin that had made me fall in love with him in college. But looking at it now, with the memory of Jade's text burning in my mind, the smile felt completely rehearsed. He was executing a role. The game had already started, but he had no idea I was now playing too. The true, horrifying depth of the betrayal did not stop at the bedroom door. It bled into every single aspect of the life we had built. 3 days after finding that sickening text message, I was doing a mundane household chore, gathering Harrison's clothes for the dry cleaners, when a small, crumpled slip of paper fell out of the inside breast pocket of his charcoal blazer. It fluttered to the laundry room floor, and I picked it up. It was a printed restaurant receipt from a notoriously expensive, high-end French bistro downtown called Chez Lauren. The date printed at the top of the receipt was Thursday evening, and the timestamp was exactly 8:30. I remembered that specific Thursday very clearly. Harrison had called me from the office around 6 o'clock, sounding incredibly stressed and exhausted. He told me he was trapped in a grueling, unexpected budget meeting with the marketing directors and would have to skip the dinner I had cooked. I had eaten a cold plate of homemade pot roast all alone at our massive kitchen island, feeling genuinely sorry for how hard my husband was working to provide for us. I smoothed out the thin paper with trembling hands, reading every single line item. The receipt showed 2 wildly expensive seafood entrees, 2 glasses of premium imported red wine, and 1 shared chocolate lava dessert. It was a classic, intimate, romantic date dinner. The total bill, including the tip, was over $400. My heart pounded a frantic rhythm against my ribs as the reality washed over me. While I was scraping his untouched, home-cooked dinner into plastic Tupperware containers in our quiet, empty house, he was sitting across a candlelit table from the young girl I had personally mentored. He was sharing a dessert and laughing, paying for the entire evening using the wealth we had built together. The emotional pain felt incredibly physical, like a sharp, jagged piece of rusted metal twisting right beneath my ribcage. "Did you find anything interesting in there?" Harrison's smooth, deep voice cut through the silence from the laundry room doorway, making me jump out of my skin. I spun around slowly, instinctively clamping my hand shut so the French bistro receipt was hidden entirely inside my palm. For a long, agonizing moment, we just stared at each other across the room. A massive, invisible chasm had opened up between us, filled with lies and deception, but he couldn't see it yet. His dark eyes flicked down to my clenched fist, and I noticed his jaw tighten just a fraction of an inch. He was testing the waters, trying to see if I had caught his sloppy mistake. "Just gathering your dry cleaning, honey," I said, my voice coming out incredibly steady and light, surprising even myself. "I need to make sure the pockets are empty so the cleaners don't ruin anything." He nodded slowly, his eyes narrowing slightly as he actively searched my face for any hint of suspicion or anger. "Thanks for doing that. You always take such amazing care of me, Caroline," he said. The words felt like a cruel, mocking slap across the face, even though his tone remained completely gentle and sweet. Part of me wanted to scream at the top of my lungs. I wanted to fling the $400 receipt right into his handsome, lying face and demand to know how he could do this to us, after 23 years of loyalty. I wanted to fight for the life we had built. But a colder, significantly smarter voice inside my head told me to stop. If I blew my top right now, if I confronted him with a single receipt and a text message, he would just lie. He would gaslight me, tell me it was a business dinner with a client, delete his tracks, change his passwords, and go completely underground. I needed to see exactly how deep this rabbit hole went before I showed my hand. So instead of screaming, I smiled softly. "Of course, sweetheart, that is what wives do," I said, slipping my hand casually into my pocket and dropping the receipt safely inside. The very next morning, once Harrison had left for the office, I decided to do some real, tangible digging into our finances. I drove downtown to our primary wealth management bank branch, where we had maintained a shared luxury safe deposit box for over 15 years. That box held our absolute safety net. It was supposed to contain $50,000 in emergency cash bundles, my late grandmother's antique diamond jewelry collection, and several high-value corporate bearer bonds that my father had passed down to me before he died. When the senior bank manager led me into the secure, climate-controlled vault, I inserted my physical key, turned it, and pulled the heavy metal drawer out of the wall. It felt unnaturally light in my hands. I set it on the viewing table and flipped the lid open. The box was completely, utterly empty. Every single dollar of the emergency cash was gone. The velvet jewelry rolls holding my family heirlooms were missing. The bonds had been cleared out. There was nothing left inside but a thin, pathetic layer of dust. I sat down heavily on the vault's metal stool, feeling the blood drain completely from my face. My breath came in short, ragged gasps. I called the branch manager back over and demanded to look at the access log. He checked the digital records and politely informed me that Harrison had come into the vault exactly 2 weeks ago, using his authorized duplicate key to access and empty the box. He wasn't just having a midlife crisis affair. He was actively preparing to abandon me, systematically stripping away my entire life security to fund a new life with a 26-year-old girl. I walked out of the bank into the bright Chicago sunshine, but I had never felt colder in my entire life. The absolute breaking point, the moment where the last remaining shred of the woman I used to be completely evaporated, arrived on a bleak, rain-soaked Thursday afternoon in early April. I had left our suburban home earlier that morning for my monthly neighborhood book club meeting. We were supposed to be discussing a lengthy historical biography, and the meeting usually ran well into the late afternoon, followed by wine and dinner with the ladies. However, due to severe flash flood warnings and torrential downpours sweeping across the county, the host decided to cancel the session early so everyone could get home safely before the roads washed out. I drove back to our house, navigating through the blinding rain, and pulled my SUV into the garage as quietly as possible so I wouldn't track mud into the main foyer. As I walked into the hallway, stepping out of my wet shoes and shaking off my umbrella, I heard the muffled sound of Harrison's voice coming from his home office at the far end of the corridor. He was supposed to be at the downtown headquarters today. The heavy oak door of his office was pushed open just a tiny crack, allowing his words to bleed out into the empty, echoing house. I stopped dead in my tracks, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs as the specific tone of his voice caught my attention. It was low, intimate, and dripping with a sickening, playful sweetness that made my stomach turn. "I know, sweetheart," Harrison said into his phone, letting out a soft sigh. "Just give me a few more months, and this entire miserable mess will finally be behind us." My blood turned to pure, solid ice. In 23 years of marriage, Harrison had never once called me sweetheart. He always thought the term was too cheesy, too cliché for a modern couple. His specific pet names for me were always honey, or beautiful, or simply love. The word sweetheart belonged entirely to someone else. It belonged to Jade. I pressed my back flat against the cool hallway wall, pulling out my smartwatch with shaking fingers. I quickly navigated to the voice memo recording application and hit the red button, making sure the digital microphone was directed toward the crack in the door. I didn't care if it was a violation of privacy. I was fighting for my survival. The lawyer told me we can expedite the entire filing process once I officially submit the paperwork, Harrison continued, his voice utterly relaxed, as if he were discussing a grocery list instead of the destruction of our family. She won't see any of this coming, I promise you. She is way too trusting for her own good. She thinks we are just having a minor rough patch because of my work schedule. Each word felt like a physical hammer hitting my skull, but I did not blink. I stood perfectly still, breathing through my mouth so I wouldn't make a sound, recording every single syllable of his betrayal. By Christmas, we will be completely free to do whatever we want. Harrison laughed softly, a sound that made me want to throw up. I promise you won't have to sneak around to cheap hotels or hide in the office break room much longer, babe. I am finalizing the corporate transfer right now. By the time she realizes her founder shares are gone, the divorce decree will already be signed and sealed. She won't have the legal standing or the money to fight us in court. She'll have the suburban house and that's it. We'll have the empire. The casual, business-like cruelty in his voice as he explicitly discussed my financial and emotional destruction ignited a spark deep inside my chest. It was an intense, white-hot anger that I did not even know I was capable of feeling. The deep hurt, the grief of losing my life partner, remained, but they were instantly joined by something incredibly hard, cold, and meticulously calculated. A quiet, dangerous voice in the back of my mind whispered, if they want to play a game of total corporate and personal ruin, I will show them exactly how a masterclass is given. I stepped backward down the hallway, keeping my movements completely silent, placing my feet carefully on the edges of the floorboards so they wouldn't creak. I slipped back out through the garage door, back into the freezing storm. I stood in the pouring rain for a few minutes, letting the cold water soak through my clothes, letting it wash away the last remnants of my grief and hesitation. The sweet, trusting, devoted wife who had loved Harrison for over 2 decades had just died in the hallway of her own home. She was permanently replaced by a ruthless co-founder who understood that love without wisdom was just a fancy word for becoming a victim. Let them believe I was completely clueless. Let them think their dirty little secret was safe and secure in their corporate text threads. Harrison and Jade had taught me that a marriage could be treated like a cheap theatrical performance, and I was about to give the absolute performance of a lifetime. I got back into my car, started the engine, and dialed my husband's number, using my best cheerful, unsuspecting voice to tell him I was picking up Italian takeout for dinner because the weather was too bad to cook. The game was officially afoot, and they had already lost without even knowing it. In the agonizing weeks following my discovery in the hallway, I forced myself to move through our sprawling suburban home like a perfectly well-behaved, oblivious ghost. It was the hardest acting job of my life. I smiled warmly whenever Harrison looked my way over his morning coffee. I continued to pack his favorite artisan lunches for work, and I nodded sympathetically whenever he fed me his elaborate, heavily scripted lies about late-night international client calls or emergency server updates that kept him at the office until midnight. But underneath that compliant, submissive, and loving exterior, my mind was operating with the forensic precision of a seasoned investigator. I was watching every move he made, documenting every inconsistency, and waiting for the right moment to gather more ammunition. I decided it was time to pay a surprise visit to our downtown corporate office. I needed to see the dynamic between them with my own new, awakened eyes. Under the simple pretense of dropping off a box of gourmet pastries from a local bakery for my hardworking husband and his team, I drove into the city. I walked through the heavy glass doors of the firm, the very same company that still bore my initials etched into the frosted glass on the main lobby wall. As I made my way toward the executive suite, I decided to stop by the employee break room to grab a bottle of water. And there I ran right into Jade. She was standing casually by the high-end espresso machine, looking incredibly polished in a tailored, charcoal designer suit that easily cost more than her monthly entry-level salary should allow. I remembered taking her shopping for her first real business outfit at a discount outlet just 2 years ago, guiding her on how to dress for success. Now she looked like she owned the entire floor. When she saw me standing in the doorway holding a bakery box, she did not flinch. She didn't look guilty or nervous. Instead, her perfectly painted lips curled into a slow, incredibly condescending smirk. It was the undeniable look of a young woman who believed she had already won the ultimate prize, a woman who viewed me as an outdated, clueless relic of Harrison's past that was about to be discarded. "Oh, hello, Caroline," Jade said, her voice dripping with an artificial, syrupy sweetness that made my skin crawl. "What brings you all the way out of the suburbs today?" "Harrison is incredibly swamped with the new digital marketing rollouts. I am trying my absolute best to keep his schedule completely clear of distractions." The implication was obvious. I was a distraction in my own company. I forced a soft, slightly ditzy smile to my face, letting my shoulders slump a bit to look less threatening and more maternal. "I just wanted to bring him some treats, dear," I said, keeping my tone completely light and airy. "He has been working so incredibly hard lately, I worry about his stress levels." Jade lifted her left hand to smooth down her perfectly styled hair, a deliberate, agonizingly slow movement that was clearly designed to make me notice something specific. Sparkling brilliantly on her wrist under the harsh office fluorescent lights was a delicate, stunning diamond tennis bracelet. My eyes narrowed slightly, not from petty jealousy, but from absolute recognition. 3 weeks ago, while doing my quiet auditing, I had noticed an unexplained, massive charge of $5,000 on our primary corporate credit card statement. Harrison had vaguely categorized it as a high-tier client appreciation gift. Here was the client, standing right in front of me, shamelessly flaunting my own stolen money. "It is a beautiful bracelet, isn't it?" Jade said, noticing my gaze and tilting her wrist intentionally so the diamonds caught the light even more. "Harrison helped me select it as a reward for my recent project completion bonus. He is so incredibly generous when he appreciates someone's true value to this company." I could feel the hot, angry blood rushing to my face. I had a primal, overwhelming urge to step forward, rip that stolen bracelet off her wrist, and throw her right out of the window of the 20th floor building. I wanted to scream that she was nothing but a thief playing dress-up with my life. But I held it in. I clamped down on the rage and kept the mask locked tight. "He really is generous," I replied, maintaining my oblivious, naive housewife persona perfectly. "He always tells me how important it is to keep the junior staff happy and motivated. Take good care of him for me, Jade." "Of course, Caroline. That is exactly what I am here for," she said, her voice laced with barely concealed laughter. She turned her back on me, her expensive heels clicking loudly and confidently against the polished hardwood floors as she walked toward Harrison's private corner office. I stood in the break room, gripping the bakery box until my knuckles turned white. She genuinely believed I was an absolute fool. She thought she was seamlessly trading up from a junior staff position to become the new trophy wife and co-owner of a multi-million-dollar marketing firm. What she didn't realize was that every diamond on her wrist, every arrogant smirk she threw in my face, and every condescending word she spoke was just another line item being added to a very long, very legal ledger of corporate fraud. And when the time came, I was going to collect on every single cent. The second week of May brought a brand new test of my patience and my acting abilities. Harrison came home on a Tuesday evening, sighing heavily and rubbing his temples as he dropped his expensive leather briefcase onto the kitchen island. He looked me straight in the eyes, wearing his most exhausted, dedicated provider expression, and explained that he had to fly out to New York first thing Friday morning. He claimed it was an emergency weekend conference with a major institutional investor who was considering pulling their funding. He said the trip was absolutely crucial for the company's Q3 survival and that he would be completely unreachable due to back-to-back, high-stakes boardroom meetings all weekend. I nodded sympathetically, walked over, kissed his cheek, and told him how sorry I was that he had to work so hard. I even went upstairs and helped him pack his overnight bag, meticulously folding his best charcoal suits and selecting his luxury ties. But the moment he walked out the door on Friday morning and headed down to his car, the loving wife routine stopped. I went straight to my home office, opened my laptop, and logged directly into our family vehicle's digital toll pass account. Harrison always drove his luxury BMW sedan for business trips that were within a 3-state radius, but for New York, He would normally take an Uber to O'Hare International Airport to avoid the nightmare of long-term parking. The fact that he took his own car this morning was the first red flag. On Friday afternoon, exactly 3 hours after Harrison allegedly boarded his non-existent flight to the East Coast, I refreshed the live digital toll pass logs online. The transponder in his BMW hadn't pinged anywhere near O'Hare Airport. Instead, it had logged 3 consecutive highway toll entries heading straight north on Interstate 94, crossing the state line into Wisconsin. I pulled up a map and tracked the route. The final ping was recorded right near Lake Geneva, a notoriously expensive luxury resort town famous for high-end spa hotels, private boat charters, and romantic weekend getaways. My husband was not sweating it out in a stressful New York boardroom trying to save our company. He was sitting in a lakeside resort with Jade, likely toasting to my upcoming financial ruin with expensive champagne paid for by our corporate expense account. Instead of feeling the panic or heartbreak that would have crippled me a month ago, a cold, refreshing wave of absolute clarity washed over me. I needed indisputable proof, not just for a divorce court, but for a corporate boardroom. I picked up my phone and called a private investigator who had been quietly recommended by a trusted college friend who worked as a paralegal in corporate law. His name was Marcus, a gritty, no-nonsense former Chicago police detective who specialized in high-asset, high-stakes marital surveillance. I didn't waste time crying on the phone. I provided him with the exact geographical location data from the toll pass, the make, model, and license plate number of Harrison's BMW, and a recent, clear photograph of Jade that I pulled from the company's staff directory website. "I don't need any drama, Marcus," I told him, my voice completely flat and professional. "I need time-stamped, high-resolution digital photographs of them together. I need restaurant receipts, hotel check-in logs if you have the connections to get them, and clear, undeniable evidence that they are sharing a single room." 2 days later, late on Sunday evening, a heavily encrypted file arrived in my personal email inbox. I paid the invoice instantly and opened the folder. Inside were 32 crystal-clear, high-definition photographs. There was Harrison, dressed in casual, expensive resort wear, holding Jade's hand intimately as they walked along the private marina. There was a shot of Jade, wearing a massive, ridiculous sun hat, kissing his cheek passionately on the balcony of a suite that I knew cost over $1,200 a night. But the absolute goldmine of the collection was a close-up photo of the valet parking and hotel folio receipt that Marcus had somehow managed to snap through a window. It clearly showed the luxury room was booked using our core corporate credit card, fraudulently listed as an executive strategy retreat. Our company charter and operating bylaws contained a very strict, legally binding moral and fiduciary character clause. If any executive officer used corporate funds for non-business, fraudulent personal activities that brought financial or reputational risk to the firm, the board of directors had the absolute right to strip them of their position and claw back their voting shares. Harrison thought he was being incredibly clever, sneaking away to Wisconsin while pretending to fly to New York. In reality, in his blinding arrogance, he had just handed me the exact, perfectly tied rope I needed to publicly hang his entire corporate career. I backed up the file into 3 separate, secure cloud drives, closed my laptop, and calmly waited for his return. I knew that simply having glossy photographs of a dirty affair wouldn't be nearly enough to completely strip Harrison of his majority control over our marketing tech firm. In the cutthroat business world, a cheating executive husband is just a boring cliché, not an actionable corporate crime. To execute a total, devastating takeover, I needed a powerful ally inside the boardroom. I needed someone who hated Harrison's arrogance as much as I did, someone who cared about hard numbers, logic, and the long-term survival of the company we built. That person was Dominic. Dominic was our company's major early-stage investor and Harrison's primary business partner. He owned 40% of the company's shares, while Harrison and I held 55% jointly as a married couple, with the remaining 5% split among minor angel stakeholders. Dominic was a quiet, intensely analytical man in his late 40s who strictly avoided office politics and loud egos. Harrison always spoke about him dismissively behind his back, calling him a boring numbers guy who lacked creative vision. But I knew Dominic was incredibly sharp. More importantly, his own wife had left him just a year prior after an ugly, very public affair, leaving him with a deep, personal detestation for infidelity, liars, and betrayal. I spent an entire week carefully studying Dominic's morning routine without him knowing. He was a man of absolute, unbreakable habit. Every single Tuesday and Thursday morning at precisely 7:15, he would enter a quiet, upscale boutique coffee shop just 3 blocks from our downtown office. He would order a black drip coffee, take the corner table by the window, and spend an hour reviewing financial reports on his digital tablet before heading in to deal with Harrison. On a crisp Thursday morning, I walked into the coffee shop, immediately spotted Dominic sitting at his usual corner table, and boldly approached him. "Dominic," I said softly, standing directly across from his table so he couldn't ignore me. "I was hoping I could join you for a few minutes." He looked up from his tablet, his analytical, dark eyes widening slightly with genuine surprise before settling into a look of cautious, guarded neutrality. "Caroline," he said, gesturing to the empty leather chair across from him. "This is highly unexpected. Please sit down. Is everything okay?" I slid into the chair, placing a thick, plain manila envelope onto the dark wood table right between us. I chose to skip all the usual, polite small talk about the Chicago weather or fake pleasantries about his health. We didn't have time for that. "I am not here as Harrison's friendly housewife, Dominic," I said, leaning forward and keeping my voice low so the barista wiping down the counter couldn't hear. "I am here as a co-founder who legally owns 27.5% of this firm. Harrison is currently having an affair with Jade from the marketing department. But more importantly for you and your investment, he is actively using corporate funds to finance her lavish lifestyle and is quietly setting up an offshore shell company called J&H Consulting to siphon our primary, highest-paying clients away from this firm before he files for divorce." Dominic didn't gasp. He didn't look shocked or outraged. He simply closed his digital tablet with a soft click, leaned back in his chair, and studied my face with intense, terrifying calculation. He reached out, picked up the manila envelope, opened it, and began silently reviewing the private investigator photos from Wisconsin, the highlighted credit card statements, and the corporate toll pass logs I had compiled. "I knew something was deeply wrong with the books this quarter," Dominic said, his voice dropping to a harsh, gravelly whisper. "He has been aggressively rushing the new digital marketing rollouts and trying to alter our internal profit-sharing agreements to benefit his specific executive account disproportionately. I thought he was just getting greedy and sloppy, but this is full-blown, systemic corporate fraud." He looked back up at me, a newfound, profound respect flickering in his eyes. "What is your exact move, Caroline? What are we doing here?" "I want to take back total control of my company, and I want Harrison removed permanently, stripped of everything," I said, my voice completely cold and steady. "But we have to let him think he is winning until the exact, perfect moment we strike. If he realizes we know about his plan, he will file for corporate bankruptcy or move the critical assets offshore where we can never touch them." Dominic's face hardened into a sharp, deeply approving smile. "I can start building a quiet, bulletproof coalition with the minor board members," he murmured, sliding the damning envelope safely into his leather briefcase. "We will let him keep playing his little game, let him feel like a king, until he digs a legal hole so deep he can never climb out. What do you need from me right now?" "Just keep monitoring the internal financial wires," I told him. "Let him think you are completely oblivious to his corporate restructuring. I will handle gathering the hard data from inside our house." We shook hands across the table, a silent, deadly pact sealed over lukewarm coffee. Harrison thought he was dealing with a simple, dependent housewife who couldn't balance a checkbook. He had no idea his trusted business partner and his simple wife had just finished building the gallows for his entire career. If this story of calculated justice has you hooked, Please hit that like button right now, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below telling me the name of the city you are watching from. Every single comment helps this video reach more viewers, and I truly appreciate your amazing support. The turning point of my entire investigation happened on a humid Saturday night in late June. Our marketing firm was hosting its annual summer charity gala at a massive downtown hotel ballroom. It was a grueling, 5-hour event filled with forced smiles, endless handshakes, and flowing champagne. Harrison spent the entire evening working the room, schmoozing with potential clients, and subtly finding ways to stand close to Jade without looking too suspicious to the untrained eye. But I was trained now. I saw every lingering glance, every brush of their arms, and every secret smile they exchanged over the ice sculptures. I played my part perfectly, standing by his side in a stunning evening gown, acting like the proud, supportive wife. By the time we finally returned to our suburban home just past midnight, Harrison was thoroughly intoxicated. He stumbled into the kitchen, downed a massive glass of water, and took a heavy prescription sleeping pill to help him pass out. Within 20 minutes, he was dead to the world, snoring loudly, spread-eagled across our king-sized bed. I waited in the dark for another full hour, staring at the ceiling, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing to ensure the sedative had completely taken over his system. At exactly 2 in the morning, I silently slipped out of bed. The hardwood floorboards felt like ice against my bare feet as I crept down the long hallway toward his home office. The house was completely silent, save for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the foyer. I stepped into his office, gently clicking the heavy oak door shut behind me, and approached his massive mahogany desk. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. I opened my laptop bag, pulled out a high-capacity, encrypted USB flash drive, and woke up his computer monitor. The screen glowed brightly in the dark room, demanding a password. Harrison had recently changed it, claiming his old password had been compromised in a corporate data breach. But men like Harrison, men blinded by their own arrogance and newfound obsessions, are rarely as clever as they think they are. I thought about Jade. She was 26 years old. I calculated her birth year. I placed my trembling fingers on the keyboard and typed in the word Jade followed by the numbers 1998. I hit the enter key. The screen flashed, loaded for a second, and successfully opened to his private desktop. A wave of absolute disgust washed over me, but I pushed it down and immediately went to work. I plugged in the secure USB drive and began digging through his hidden folders. Harrison was incredibly organized, which made my job much easier. Buried deep within a folder labeled Boring Tax Archives, I found the motherlode. It was a completely separate set of corporate books. I found massive spreadsheet files, massive CSV data dumps detailing secret offshore bank accounts, and unauthorized wire transfers. But the most damning piece of evidence was a master document outlining the incorporation of a brand new shell company. It was registered in Delaware and named J&H Consulting. Jade and Harrison. The documents proved exactly how he planned to systematically devalue my founder shares and siphon our most lucrative, multi-million-dollar client contracts directly into this new entity before he even filed for divorce. He was going to bleed our main company dry, leave me with a worthless, empty corporate shell, and walk away a multi-millionaire with his young protege. I spent 3 agonizing hours in that freezing, dark office, copying every single file, every email export, and every digital ledger onto my USB drive. Every time the house settled or a floorboard creaked, I froze in absolute terror, imagining Harrison standing behind me. But he never came. By 5 in the morning, the transfer was complete. I safely ejected the drive, shut down his computer, wiped down the keyboard to remove any fingerprints, and slipped back into bed just as the early morning sun began to bleed through the curtains. I lay there beside the man who was actively trying to ruin my life, feeling the cold, hard plastic of the USB drive safely tucked inside my pajama pocket. I finally had the weapon I needed. Armed with a mountain of undeniable digital evidence, I knew I needed serious, ruthless legal representation. I could not use our regular family attorneys or anyone connected to our corporate legal team. I needed a shark who operated completely in the shadows. Through a series of highly discreet inquiries made through a trusted college friend, I found Fiona. Fiona was a high-end, terrifyingly sharp financial attorney who specialized in dismantling the complex financial fortresses of wealthy, cheating executives. She was not the kind of lawyer who went to trial to argue about hurt feelings. She was the kind of lawyer who quietly froze bank accounts and destroyed empires before the ink on the divorce papers was even dry. I met Fiona in a nondescript, heavily soundproofed office on the outskirts of the city. I placed the encrypted USB drive on her desk and laid out the entire story. Fiona plugged it in, spent 30 minutes scrolling through the J&H consulting documents and the offshore wire transfers, and then looked up at me with a predatory, brilliant smile. "Your husband is incredibly sloppy," she said, leaning back in her leather chair. "Men like him always assume their wives are too emotional to look at the math. We're going to let him keep thinking exactly that. But to pull this off, I cannot be your attorney of record. If Harrison sees my name on any legal filing, he will instantly know you are onto his financial fraud, and he will scramble to hide the assets deeper." Fiona laid out a brilliant, devious strategy. She would remain completely invisible, operating as my silent, hidden legal architect. Meanwhile, I needed to hire a public decoy. I needed to hire the absolute worst, most incompetent divorce lawyer in the entire city of Chicago to officially represent me. That is how I found Bradley. Bradley was a loud, disorganized, constantly sweating attorney whose primary reputation in the legal community was losing high-profile cases and settling for pennies on the dollar. He wore cheap suits, spilled coffee on his own legal briefs, and spoke in ridiculous, outdated legal jargon. I paid him a hefty retainer and told him I just wanted to get the divorce over with as peacefully as possible. Bradley was thrilled to have a wealthy client, completely unaware that he was just a clumsy puppet in a much larger, highly orchestrated war. The day Harrison received the official notice that I had retained Bradley as my legal counsel, I watched him read the letter in our kitchen. He tried to maintain a solemn, serious face, but I could literally see the corners of his mouth twitching with suppressed joy. He excused himself, walked into the hallway, and I immediately pulled up my cloned message app. He was texting Jade. He wrote, "You are not going to believe this, babe. Caroline just hired Bradley the clown to represent her. The guy is a total joke in the industry. This is going to be an absolute cakewalk. We're going to take everything." I stood in the kitchen, sipping my morning coffee, smiling softly to myself. Let him celebrate. Let him think he was a grandmaster playing chess against a toddler. He had no idea that the real game had not even started, and my invisible queen was already moving into position to strike. Even with Fiona building our legal trap and Dominic securing the minor board members, I still had one major problem. Harrison had transferred millions of dollars, but the money was spread out across a dozen different, confusing accounts. Fiona told me that tracing all of it in a corporate audit could take months, giving Harrison a potential window to create fake invoices and cover his tracks. We needed him to consolidate the stolen funds into one massive, easily identifiable offshore account so we could seize it in a single, fatal blow. We needed to make him panic. I decided to plant a seed of pure terror. On a quiet Sunday evening, while Harrison was standing in the kitchen preparing his protein shake, I sat in the adjoining living room and dialed my older sister's number. I had already warned her about the script. I waited until I knew Harrison had stopped the blender and could hear me perfectly. I forced my voice to tremble, letting out a loud, manufactured sob. "I am just so incredibly stressed out, Linda," I cried loudly into the phone. "I just got a terrifying letter in the mail today. The IRS is doing a massive, random audit on our personal tax returns for the last 5 years." I heard a sudden, sharp clatter from the kitchen as Harrison dropped a heavy protein powder scoop onto the granite counter. I kept talking, pacing the living room floor so my voice projected clearly. "I don't know anything about our taxes," I sobbed, wiping away imaginary tears. "Harrison handles all the money. But the letter said they're going to do a deep dive into all our bank accounts starting next week, and if they find any irregularities, they might audit the marketing firm too. I am so scared, Linda. What if we made a mistake? I hung up the phone and buried my face in my hands, doing my absolute best impression of a hysterical, terrified housewife. Harrison walked slowly into the living room, his face completely pale, his eyes wide with genuine panic. "Did you just say the IRS is auditing us?" he asked, his voice cracking slightly. I nodded, looking up at him with wide, innocent eyes. "Yes, honey. They want 5 years of records. I am sure everything is fine, right? You always keep such good records." "Everything is perfectly fine, Caroline," he lied smoothly, though I could see a bead of cold sweat forming on his forehead. "Do not worry your pretty head about it. I will call our accountants first thing in the morning and handle the whole thing." The bait was taken, swallowed completely whole. Over the next 48 hours, Harrison and Jade went into an absolute, frantic frenzy. Believing the federal government was about to comb through their domestic bank accounts, they completely abandoned their careful, slow transfer strategy. They scrambled to hide the money quickly. I sat back and watched the chaos unfold. Dominic called me from his encrypted line 2 days later, his voice filled with dark amusement. "You actually did it, Caroline," Dominic laughed. "Harrison just executed 3 massive, incredibly sloppy wire transfers. He moved almost $4 million from our various domestic reserve accounts directly into a single, high-yield offshore account in the Cayman Islands under the J&H Consulting banner. He left a digital paper trail a mile wide. It is the most reckless financial move I have ever seen in my entire career." Fiona confirmed it an hour later. The money was consolidated, sitting in one neat, legally isolated pile. By trying to hide from a completely fake IRS audit, Harrison had conveniently gathered all of my stolen money and placed it exactly where my invisible lawyer needed it to be. The trap was fully set, the bait was taken, and the jaws were finally ready to snap shut. September finally arrived, bringing a bitter, unseasonable chill to the Chicago air. The official divorce mediation was scheduled for 9 in the morning on a Friday. The location was a sleek, intimidating glass and steel conference room at the downtown offices of Harrison's incredibly expensive, high-powered legal team. I walked into the room wearing a drab, oversized gray sweater, my hair tied back in a messy bun, and absolutely no makeup. I wanted to look completely defeated, emotionally exhausted, and entirely broken by the process. Harrison was already sitting at the long mahogany table, wearing a sharp, custom-tailored navy suit, looking like a man who was about to win the Super Bowl. Sitting next to him was his lead attorney, a slick, aggressive man named Richard who charged $1,000 an hour to bully vulnerable women into submission. On my side of the table sat Bradley, my brilliant decoy. Bradley looked like a disaster. His tie was crooked, he was sweating profusely, and he accidentally knocked his own coffee cup over within the first 5 minutes, frantically wiping it up with a stack of cheap napkins. Harrison watched Bradley's clumsy display and then looked across the table at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of pity and absolute triumph. During the meeting, his phone buzzed repeatedly on the table. I knew exactly who it was. Jade was texting him, eager to hear that I had finally been thrown out into the cold so she could take her rightful place on her stolen throne. Richard, the aggressive lawyer, opened his thick leather binder and cleared his throat. "Let us get straight to the point, Caroline," he began, using a tone reserved for slow children. "Harrison recognizes your long history together, and he wants to be extremely generous. He is offering you full ownership of the suburban house, completely mortgage-free, and a one-time alimony buyout of $200,000. In exchange, you will waive all rights to his ongoing corporate salary, your founder shares in the marketing firm, and any of his independent, international investment portfolios." It was an insultingly low offer. Our company was valued at nearly $40 million, and the house was a tiny fraction of what I was legally owed after 23 years of marriage and co-founding the firm. Bradley fumbled with his paperwork, stuttering a bit. "Well, that seems a little low, Richard. My client needs security." Richard leaned forward, flashing a shark-like smile. Your client has not contributed to the daily operations of the company in 5 years. She is a housewife. If we take this to a public trial, we will argue that her shares are obsolete, and the legal fees alone will bankrupt her. This is a golden ticket, Bradley. Take it or leave it. I buried my face in my hands, letting my shoulders shake violently. I forced out real, heavy tears, crying openly into a tissue. I don't want to fight anymore, I sobbed, looking at Harrison with pathetic, broken eyes. I just want peace. You built the company, Harrison. You worked so hard. Just please promise me the business will be safe. Harrison's chest literally puffed out with pride. He reached across the table and briefly patted my hand, a sickening gesture of fake comfort. I promise, Caroline, he said softly. I will take good care of the empire. You just take the house and relax. I wiped my nose, nodded slowly, and told Bradley I was ready to sign the agreement. I was ready to surrender my empire for pennies. Richard quickly slid the massive, 60-page separation agreement across the polished table, handing me a heavy gold fountain pen. Sign on the last page and initial the addendums, he instructed, unable to completely hide the massive, victorious grin on his face. Bradley, my bumbling clown of a lawyer, took the document first. Now, he may have been a terrible trial lawyer, but he was very good at following basic instructions. Fiona, my shadow attorney, had paid Bradley to secretly slip 2 completely new pages of addendums into the massive stack of boilerplate legal jargon late the previous night. Bradley handed the stack back to me, giving me a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. I picked up the pen and began to sign, letting my hand shake slightly so my signature looked distressed. I signed away my rights to the ongoing corporate revenue. I initialed the page surrendering my basic founder shares. Harrison sat back in his leather chair, practically vibrating with excitement. He had done it. He had stolen millions, completely secured his future with Jade, and discarded his aging wife without a single fight. But what Harrison did not read, and what his incredibly arrogant, $1,000-an-hour lawyer failed to double-check because they thought they were dealing with an idiot, was the specific language on page 42. Fiona was a genius. The addendum explicitly defined the term legitimate corporate assets. It stated that I, Caroline, waived all rights to any and all legitimate business holdings and standard investment portfolios. However, buried right in the middle of a massive block of dense, mind-numbing legal text was the poison pill. It clearly stipulated that if any asset, offshore account, or corporate share was discovered to have been acquired, transferred, or hidden through fiduciary fraud, embezzlement, or violations of the corporate character clause, that specific asset was immediately classified as non-marital, illicit property. And in the event of such a discovery, 100% of those illicit, fraudulent assets would immediately and irrevocably revert to my sole ownership as punitive damages. Because Harrison had used corporate funds to fund his affair, and because he had illegally transferred millions of corporate dollars into a secret J&H consulting shell company to hide it from the fake IRS audit, none of those assets were legally protected by the waiver I was signing. In fact, by signing this document, I was legally putting a lock on every single dollar he had stolen, ensuring the courts would hand it all directly back to me. I reached the final page, signed my full name with a grand flourish, and slid the document back across the table to Harrison. He eagerly snatched the pen, signed his own name with aggressive, confident strokes, and pushed it toward his lawyer for the final notary stamp. "It is officially done," Richard announced, snapping the binder shut. "Congratulations to you both on a peaceful resolution." Harrison stood up, buttoned his suit jacket, and looked down at me. "I truly wish you the best, Caroline," he said, his voice dripping with condescending pity. "Try to find a nice hobby to occupy your time in the suburbs." I looked up at him, my tears suddenly completely gone, my face relaxing into a calm, terrifyingly blank stare. "Oh, I don't need a hobby, Harrison," I replied softly, dropping the used tissue into the trash can. "I am going back to work." He frowned, clearly confused by the sudden change in my tone, but he didn't have time to analyze it. He checked his luxury watch. I have to go, he said to Richard. I have a very important, emergency corporate board meeting at 2 o'clock to finalize our new Q4 strategy. I watched him walk out of the conference room, eager to go claim his stolen kingdom. I waited until the door clicked shut, then turned to Bradley. Excellent work today, Bradley, I said, grabbing my purse. Now, if you will excuse me, I have a 2 o'clock board meeting to attend. The corporate headquarters of our marketing firm was buzzing with high-stakes energy when the emergency board meeting convened at exactly 2 in the afternoon. The meeting was held in the massive, glass-walled executive conference room on the top floor, offering a panoramic view of the Chicago skyline. Harrison strode into the room exactly on time, looking like a conquering emperor returning from war. He took his usual seat near the head of the long table, loosening his silk tie, fully expecting this meeting to be a simple formality where he would announce his total financial control over the firm. But things were already wrong. Harrison noticed it immediately. The head chair, traditionally his seat, was occupied by Dominic. The 5 minor board members were all present, sitting completely silent, their faces incredibly grim. And sitting in the corner, operating a laptop connected to the room's massive digital projector, was Fiona, my shadow attorney, looking like an absolute predator. What is going on here, Dominic? Harrison demanded, his confident smile faltering slightly as he looked around the room. Who is the woman with the laptop? This is a closed corporate meeting. Dominic did not smile. He simply folded his hands on the table. This is an emergency disciplinary hearing, Harrison, Dominic said, his voice echoing loudly in the quiet room. We have spent the last 3 months conducting a silent, comprehensive forensic audit of your executive accounts. Harrison's face instantly lost all of its color. He looked like a man who had just stepped off a cliff and was waiting to hit the ground. What are you talking about? My accounts are perfectly fine. Fiona hit a button on her laptop. The massive projector screen behind Dominic flared to life. The first image was a blown-up, crystal-clear photograph of Harrison and Jade kissing on the balcony of the luxury resort in Wisconsin, right next to the massive hotel bill paid for by the corporate card. The second slide was a detailed CSV spreadsheet showing the $4 million wire transferred out of the company reserve directly into the J&H Consulting offshore account in the Cayman Islands. The final slide was an email exchange between Harrison and Jade, explicitly discussing how to bleed my founder shares dry. This is an absolute outrage, Harrison shouted, leaping to his feet, his voice cracking with pure, unadulterated panic. These are personal investments. This is stolen data. You cannot do this. My wife just signed away all her rights to these accounts at 9 o'clock this morning. I have the signed legal waiver in my briefcase right now. The heavy glass door of the conference room swung open. I walked in, no longer wearing the oversized, drab sweater from the morning mediation. I was dressed in a razor-sharp, tailored black designer suit, my hair perfectly styled, my posture straight as an arrow. The entire room went dead silent. Harrison stared at me as if he were looking at a terrifying ghost. I walked slowly to the front of the room, pulled the final, notarized divorce decree out of my leather portfolio, and dropped it heavily onto the polished table right in front of Harrison. Yes, you have the waiver, Harrison, I said, my voice ringing out with absolute, undeniable authority. But you clearly did not read page 42. I waived my rights to your legitimate assets. But according to the addendum you eagerly signed just 5 hours ago, any corporate assets acquired or hidden through fiduciary fraud and embezzlement instantly revert 100% to me as punitive damages. Harrison scrambled to grab the document, flipping frantically through the pages, his hands shaking so violently he tore one of the sheets. He found page 42. He read the clause. I watched his eyes dart back and forth across the text as the horrific reality of his situation finally crushed him. By stealing company funds to finance your affair, and by creating a fraudulent shell company to hide money from a fake IRS audit that I entirely made up, you triggered the penalty clause, I continued, leaning forward so I was inches from his face. You do not own J&H Consulting anymore, Harrison. I do. I own the Cayman accounts. I own your voting shares. I own the suburban house. I own it all. You are leaving this marriage and this company with absolutely nothing but the suit on your back." Harrison collapsed backward into his leather chair, the signed divorce document slipping from his numb fingers and falling to the floor. The great corporate mastermind had just been utterly, completely destroyed by the wife he thought was too stupid to understand math. The silence in the boardroom was deafening, broken only by the hum of the projector displaying Harrison's financial crimes. Dominic stood up, looking down at his former business partner with absolute disgust. In accordance with the corporate bylaws and the strict moral character clause, Dominic announced formally to the room, "I call for an immediate vote to terminate Harrison's employment as Chief Executive Officer, effectively instantly, for gross misconduct, embezzlement, and severe breach of fiduciary duty." The 5 board members raised their hands in unanimous, immediate agreement. It took exactly 10 seconds to strip Harrison of a title he had spent 20 years building. "Security is already on their way up," Dominic added. "We have frozen your corporate access cards, disabled your email, and locked you out of the server. You have exactly 10 minutes to pack whatever personal items are in your office before you are escorted out of the building. And Harrison, our corporate attorneys will be handing this entire dossier over to the police for criminal wire fraud investigation by the end of the day." Harrison didn't argue. He couldn't. He was a completely broken man, hollowed out by the sheer magnitude of his own catastrophic failure. He stood up slowly, leaning heavily on the table for support, and stumbled out of the boardroom without looking at me. As Harrison was being escorted to his office by 2 massive security guards, I walked out into the main hallway to witness the second half of the execution. Jade had been summoned from the marketing department. She was standing near the elevators, holding a cardboard box, screaming hysterically at the human resources director. She had just been summarily fired for her role in the corporate fraud, and she was informed that the company would be aggressively suing her for the return of the stolen $5,000 diamond bracelet. Harrison walked past her, flanked by security. Jade lunged toward him, her face red and streaked with mascara. "Harrison, do something," she screamed, grabbing his arm. "They are firing me. They said they are going to sue me. Tell them to stop. We own this company." Harrison looked at the 26-year-old girl he had literally thrown his entire life away for. The illusion of their grand romance completely vanished under the crushing weight of total poverty and impending criminal charges. He violently shoved her hand off his arm. "Get away from me, you stupid girl," he yelled at her, his voice echoing down the hallway. "This is all your fault. If you hadn't been so demanding, I wouldn't have had to move the money so fast. You ruined everything." "You ruined it," Jade screamed back, throwing her cardboard box on the ground, sending pens and desk toys scattering across the floor. "You told me she was a clueless idiot. You promised me millions. You are nothing but a broke, lying old man." I stood quietly near the boardroom doors, watching the 2 miserable lovers turn on each other like starving wolves fighting over a scrap of meat. Their corporate empire had completely collapsed into a pile of ashes in less than 20 minutes. The purge was spectacular, absolute, and deeply satisfying. 3 months passed. Winter arrived in Chicago, covering my sprawling suburban estate in a quiet, peaceful blanket of white snow. I was absolutely thriving. With Harrison gone, Dominic and I took full control of the marketing tech firm. We repaired the damage Harrison had caused, secured our major clients, and the company was on track to have its most profitable quarter in 5 years. The offshore money Harrison had tried to steal had been safely and legally repatriated into my personal accounts, leaving him virtually penniless, drowning in mounting legal debt as he fought the criminal wire fraud charges. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, I was sitting in my warm living room, reading a book by the fireplace, when the front doorbell rang. I walked to the foyer, looked through the peephole, and let out a long, exhausted sigh. I opened the heavy oak door. Standing on my frozen porch was Harrison. He looked like a ghost. He had aged 10 years in 3 months. His hair was unkempt, his face was gaunt, and he was wearing a cheap, thin winter coat that looked entirely insufficient for the Chicago weather. In his shaking hands, he held a pathetic bouquet of discount grocery store roses wrapped in cheap plastic. "Caroline," he whispered, his voice trembling from the cold. "Please. I am so sorry. Jade left me the second the money disappeared. She blocked my number. I have absolutely nothing. I made the biggest mistake of my entire life. I was hoping maybe we could try to start over. I miss my home. I miss my wife." I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't feel anything but a mild, distant pity for the broken creature standing on my porch. I reached over to the console table near the door and picked up a single sheet of paper I had kept exactly for this inevitable moment. I handed it to him. Harrison took it with shaking hands and looked down. It was a printed photograph of his phone screen, showing the 5:47 morning text message from Jade. Attached to it was a full, typed transcript of the phone call I had recorded in the hallway, where he coldly promised to leave me destitute. "You did not make a mistake, Harrison," I said, my voice completely calm and clear in the freezing air. "You made a calculated, cruel business decision to destroy me. Your only mistake was believing I was stupid enough to let you get away with it. I knew about the affair the entire time. I orchestrated every single moment of your downfall for 6 solid months while you smiled in my face. We have absolutely nothing to talk about." He stared at the paper, his mouth opening and closing as the horrifying realization finally set in. He realized that every tear I cried, every dinner I cooked, and every plea for peace during the mediation was just a masterful, calculated performance. He had been nothing but a pawn on my chessboard. I stepped back inside the warm house and gently, firmly closed the heavy oak door directly in his face, locking the deadbolt with a satisfying click. I walked back to the living room, threw another log onto the roaring fire, and sat down to finish my book. For the first time in 23 years, I was completely alone, absolutely powerful, and breathing entirely free. Was I wrong for stringing him along and letting him dig his own corporate grave for 6 agonizing months, or should I have just confronted him the morning I saw that very first text message from my own protege? Put yourself in my shoes. What would you have done if your entire life's work was on the line? Let me know your verdict in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that like button and the notification bell so you never miss another story. See you in the next video.